order. It is 6:01 p.m. We do have all members of council present, and I do call us to order. Mr. Moss.
The Trophy Club Municipal Utility District Number 1 Board of Directors is now in session. The time is 6:01. All the directors are present. I would like to request that the mayor be chairman this evening.
All right, thank you, President Moss. We have 50 minutes. We'll try to end at about 10 minutes till if we can, so that we can rearrange everything. We do have a lot of items to discuss, so let's move forward and try to stay on topic as much as we can. Item number 1, consider and take appropriate action regarding a ground lease agreement with the Town of Trophy Club Municipal Utility District Number 1 for use of the annex building located at 100 Municipal Drive. We had a subcommittee of 2 members of council and 2 members of MUD Board who worked on this, and I saw some activity going back and forth about the agreement, and it seems like there's still a few items left to agree upon. Is that correct, everybody? Stephen and Jennifer, is that correct based on y'all's knowledge, or not?
I think it's an opportunity for the town council and the MUD board to discuss any type of issues that may be outstanding and hopefully come to some type of resolution on those items and move forward with a document for approval.
Do you have a list of those?
We do not have a list, but I'm getting ready to get that talked about based on the members of the subcommittee.
Okay.
Some plan was to go to the subcommittees from the council and MUD and say, what were your issues? Let's get those on the table so we can deal with those. So, Garrett, I saw you raise your hand. Did you want to speak?
If I can. So it was Kevin and Neil, myself, and Tim that were assigned to that subcommittee. And I think one thing that was accomplished is I think we have a solid boilerplate lease, if you will. So I think the form of the lease that we've all looked at and agreed to is something that I think both bodies can and be comfortable with. I think that. I think what it came down to was there were some issues of use. There was some issues when I went back, some issues in terms of the amount of time that we were leasing the building for. Kevin and I talked on the phone, and if everybody remembers correctly, it was about a 30-minute conversation we had, and there were some very long motions in that where one person would start with something and it would kind of, is it 25 years, is it 10 years, is it 1-year options? Tim and Neil and Kevin and I discussed these things. I thought with use, what we did with the building, how long we had the building, and then there was probably a couple of other comments that some other people on the council would have. I thought that tonight, unless there's an objection to this, we sit down and we come up with an agreement tonight, because I think the lease in itself is probably agreeable, but there's some issues of what are we going to do with the building, what is the MUD's direction or input that they can have as to what we do with the building, the parking, renovations, and all these kinds of things. So I think tonight, and Kevin, you may want to chime in. I don't want to steal all the spotlight here, but I think we need to go over 4 or 5 large issues and try to work them out tonight. I think we just start from scratch and see if we can get them worked out. But
Kevin, did you want to speak?
Yes. At our initial meeting, I mean, we pretty much worked out what I thought was about 85%, and then obviously, you know, your council disagreed with some of them or had some issues with some, and the motion you're referring to was a council motion. It wasn't a joint motion. But as far as the use of the building, it was brought to our attention initially that you could save the taxpayers, and correct me if I'm wrong, about $1 million by utilizing that space as offices, and that's what the lease agreement went into it as office space. Now I hear different things, which I mean probably isn't going to be a problem, but I'm just wondering, has the council had any plans, or do they know what they want to use for the building for? Because usually when you lease a building, you have a use, you know, that you're going to use it for. You know, so I'm going to lease that building because it's there. So I guess I'm looking if we're going to do a lease and you have something specific in mind, then, let's work at that point.
So, council, each of you should have a copy of the draft lease agreement for municipal building annex. Looks like this as a blank for date. I assume my board has a copy of the same. Do you have that kind of document in y'all's packet? Yep. Okay. As I go down it, the first place that I see something on the first page is a blank that says blank parking spots. Was that something debated that has to be decided upon?
Well, the parking, right now, it looks like, if you close on your land and start construction of building, you're looking at, I would say, minimum, a year and a half, 2 years. Is that correct to assess? Anyone?
Yep, I
Okay.
think that's a fair
So,
statement.
as far as the parking allocation, I think we had in mind, okay, number one, when is the parking going to be allocated? Right now, obviously, nothing would change. You're still in the building for minimum year and a half, 2 years, so parking is, free-for-all, first come, first serve. If you're going to make it a meeting room or something like that, and there's expected high, attendance in that building, then that could be a problem. Another thing that comes into play is if there's a water storage tank, we have a study going on right now, is to be placed on that site. Obviously, parking is restricted there. We still need parking for, our staff and anyone that attends meetings or events.
All right, Neil, I saw you raise your hand.
Well, simply the 23 allocated spaces, 11 are the spaces directly abutting the building. Oops, sorry. Directly abutting the building, and there's 12 spaces across the parking lot up against where one of the ground storage tanks are, again, directly across. And the discussion was that once you're using this, nothing changes now, but once you occupy your new town hall, then there'd be at least 23 spaces allocated for the remaining staff that would stay in that building and use it for offices. And again, to reinforce what Kevin said, when the committee got together, we were under the premise that you were going to continue to use the annex as office space. And somewhere along the line, that has changed.
Okay, let's clarify that point. Council has taken no action to say exactly how big the building's going to be at the new location. The last action that we had, correct me if I'm wrong, was that we came up with a square footage of what was going to be planned when we were looking at the Methodist Church land, and that included utilizing the entire roughly 4,000 square foot of the annex building. So council hasn't taken any action on that, so anything you're getting is just discussion and maybe comments that people are making. So it looks like to me that the paragraph at the bottom of page 1 that name says 23 spaces. It says upon completion of the town hall. So the reality is you're not addressing anything about parking spaces today. You're just saying when you have a new town hall, 23 spaces, but then it goes on and says a diagram attached to this lease exhibit B, which includes blank parking spots. So if we're signing this today, do we want to fill in the blank? Do we want to remove that item that's exhibit B that isn't with us?
Nick, I think what that was intended for is so that it's to make sure that y'all get parking right there in front, exactly north of the annex. So in other words, we don't say we get all the good ones across the front and y'all have to go out in the field. That was kind of the point of that. And I have since gone out there and counted them. I don't have my book just to see how many were right there across the front. And I think it was 11. But that number, it would be a diagram that actually shows that was kind of the idea behind that.
Okay, I think that's a good point. So that makes sense for that deal. So, Philip, you had your hand up, I believe.
Well, what I was going to point out, if you went into this agreement with just thinking that we were going to use it for office space, I don't think that you would have put permitted use. So you know that we're looking at all different options, not just office space.
There's certain, when you lease property, the town has restrictions on uses of what you can build and what you can use in Trophy Club. It's the same thing. There's certain things that we prefer not to have, because of neighbors and, being neighbor friendly.
But I think we were always gonna explore all options, not just office.
So what paragraph are you
Well,
referring to that says permitted use?
Permitted
I mean, the
use
big,
is
the
second
big thing
page.
is, I mean,
I'm
the
sorry?
Permitted use is on the second page.
On the second page, that's what I thought
I
you
mean,
were doing.
let's just cut to the chase. The thing you're talking about is the Senior Citizen Center,
No,
correct?
no, I'm saying that we didn't, I don't think that we went in this just saying that we were gonna save $1 million and just keep our staff there.
I disagree. I mean,
Okay.
but that's another
Guys,
topic.
look, we're never gonna get through with these items if we don't deal with the points of this lease. Everything said outside a point of this lease is out of order, as far as I'm concerned. How about you, Mr. Moss?
Yes, sir.
So, stay on the topic of the words of the lease, and let's agree and move forward if you're gonna get anything finished. Otherwise, we'll debate issues back and forth, please. Thank you. All right, Philip, do you have something about the lease?
No, that was about the lease.
Okay.
That was permitted use. That's why I was
We're gonna
bringing
get to
it up.
permitted uses in just a second, I believe. So, point out that issue again about where is permitted uses.
Second page, middle of the page.
That has that starts as a bold, office, storage, community meeting room, but not including an animal control shelter. So that's currently in the lease. Council, are you agreeable to those words? Or you have any problem with those words?
Well, just some minor things. It says room. If we did do a community center, we could divide it into different rooms. So do we want to put the word rooms in there? Where you have movable walls?
You sure could, or you could say meeting space, and it doesn't have anything to do with 1 room, 5 rooms, right?
You might want to say meeting spaces and make it plural, again, for the same reason, make it multiple instead of singular.
But if
All right.
you just
Nick, I
add an
think
S to
Rylan has a
room,
comment.
Nick, don't you take care of
That
it?
could do it too. All right.
Add an S.
So, Ryland, do you have something on this topic?
About parking. So.
Oh, you
if-
want to go back to parking?
Right, so
All
if you
I'm
guys
sorry.
want to go around and around on
Back
this,
to
go
that,
ahead.
please.
So for parking, so there's no accounting being done on the parking spaces right now, correct? Parking wasn't discussed at our previous meeting when we were all here and set this process forward. So going with the spirit of what the mayor just said, I don't see that there's going to be enough of a material change in the overall use of the parking spaces when we have 50 less people there now or there in the future than we do today to bog down tonight's process. I think that the introduction of parking spaces altogether has introduced a debate point that's going to prevent us from accomplishing anything tonight. So my recommendation would be that we just leave it out of the agreement. I don't think it's material.
All right, Jim Thomas, you raised your hand.
And Ron, I have no objection with that. Please understand, in our meeting, what we did was, we said it's not our job to think in terms of how you're gonna use a building. It's our job to think in terms of what do we need. And so, whether it be a senior citizen center, whether it be a community center, regardless, there will be activities during the daytime where people will want to come up and park. And maybe you might be absolutely right, with 50 less employees, it might work out. All we try to do is identify the number of spaces that we would need to put a reserve for MUD employees and MUD visitors signs on. And I think the number was 23.
And I think you'd be well within your privilege to do that no matter what, because it's your parking lot.
All right.
I just have a quick question. Steve, how many people are in this building, staff?
In terms of both buildings or this?
Yeah, the police are gonna, I mean, that's where a storage tank possibly goes, so you can't.
The
include that
annex
as
building.
part.
The annex building has, let me count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. I believe there's 15 individuals who office in the annex.
Right, so that's where'd the 50 come from? That's,
We just have, how many people do we have that office that aren't in the field?
Uh,
That aren't in the field, including PD? Yeah. And we're talking about parking. I mean, it's close to 50, right?
you only have
You're
s-
probably in the high 30s, maybe.
Yeah.
Now that I think about it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
probably in that.
Sorry.
Okay.
Point
because-
stands.
Because, well, once you add personal vehicles in for like PD, that's where they park, and then they then get into their police vehicle. And you're probably in the 30s range. I mean, I could come up with that number for you.
Yeah. Are you counting like landscapers who would park their car here and then take the?
No,
Town
sir.
trucks.
They go to a different facility in the morning when they come to work.
All right. So
for this particular agreement, does anybody object on either side to leaving 23, coming up with an Exhibit B that talks about the front spaces along the annex building, I think is what Jennifer's referring to, and Stephen, and we move that item forward. Is that agreeable? All right. Next item in the list of things would be terms on page 2. This document says 10 years with an option to extend as provided in this lease. So any discussion about that particular item? Mr. Lamont?
Originally, we had 25 years, and I appreciate the MUD directors taking out the ban on the senior center. But if it's limited to 10 years, I think it's very difficult if we wanted to do a community center. If we signed it tonight, 10 years, and it takes 2 years to build the town hall, and then maybe another year to do renovations, that brings us down to 7 years usage, where they could come back in and say, we want the building. And I don't think that's cost effective on that. Also, the termination, well, all right, we'll with that.
Let's deal with terms. Anybody want to comment about it so we can get these items?
Well, the terms and the termination, I think, roll together.
All right with
Kind of
that.
roll together. So
But,
if you-
I mean, the way I think Garrett and Tim and I.
Well, let me finish it, they roll
Okay,
together,
sorry.
okay?
Yeah.
So originally it was 3 years' notice, now you're down to 1 year notice. And also, the discussion was that you would only require office space
23
if
spaces.
a governmental entity required it, whether it be TCEQ or EPA. Now you're saying for any business reason, for any reason. So if you decide you just wanted a bigger room, you could say, get out in 10 years. And I think that prevents us from doing a lot of stuff with the space.
Can I say something, Nick? Just jump in,
Garrett.
just to expedite things a little bit, because Kevin and I went round and round on this. There was multiple discussions about this during the meeting. We talked about this, and it can be interpreted different ways as to, was it 10 years, was it 25 years, what was it? So I think tonight, just to expedite things, let's just wipe it blank. What can you guys agree to in term? What can we agree to in term? And let's not go back and rehash what it was. We're here tonight. Let's just find a amount of time.
Where did the subcommittee end up?
10 years.
We ended up with 10 years.
We were at 10, except that the year, they had to give us a year to vacate, but they could only
After
have us
10 years.
vacate.
After the 10.
Right, after the 10, but we could still only vacate if the state told them that they had to change the use. They couldn't
That's
just.
not in here, though.
I realize that. I mean, that was my understanding, but.
All right.
So what are you proposing, that we go back and?
I'm proposing that you guys, how long do y'all want to, let's just figure out what the time is tonight. I just don't want to go back and say, you said, what did we say? How long are y'all willing to give us a solid, guaranteed lease? We don't have to leave the building.
We've agreed to what's in here, correct?
So,
Yeah, what we talked about.
so 10 years.
Yeah, we had options of 25 with a 3 or 5 year.
Right.
And then I made a motion at the last string that, no, let's just do a fixed. So for 10 years, it's there. And
Right.
then we talked about in our meeting to extend it out.
Okay.
As far as the governmental requirement, for myself, I'm not going to, hang a lease on something that a TCQ or a governmental entity has to come down and say, okay, we think you need more space for storage or records or whatever, and have to have that. I don't think that's
Okay,
right.
so let me tell you what some of the thought process is. And
Let me ask
we,
a question first, just
Go
for
ahead.
clarification. As I read terms and termination date, and just correct me if I'm wrong, this is a 10-year lease, and that the 1-year notice says landlord shall give written notice to a tenant at least 1 year prior to the effective date of the termination. So, meaning during the 10 years you can give 1 year notice? Anytime during the 10 years? What does that mean? Because I think that's,
I think our intent, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gary, is that at year 9, you'd have to give a notice. Is that right, Gary?
that's correct.
Yes.
okay, that's the way I read this, but I could read it both ways, and I just wanted to make sure that we all
You
agree.
read things a lot differently, up, down, sideways.
Okay, Garrett, go back.
I think what Kevin is saying is, and correct me if I'm putting word, it's 10 years of lease term that you couldn't terminate. Here's here's where I think the council's coming from, and I think this is where we're gonna ask for a bit of leniency and maybe for more term. If we didn't know what we were gonna do with that building, but it was the general intent that we were gonna buy the Methodist land and we were gonna try to utilize this building. Obviously now we're gonna try to, and we don't know if we're gonna do this or not, put all the facilities in one building. We've been able to secure a piece of land that we can do that, which leaves us with an asset that that could become a great benefit to the community. Whether it's a senior center or a community center, it's an asset that we own that for a little bit of bale and wire and duct tape, if you will, for a little bit of money, a couple $100,000, we could turn it into something that the community could use. Now, if that's the road we go down, the 10 years is not going to be enough time for us to be able to pay back that loan we're going to have to take out. So I think that now becomes our concern. So are y'all willing to work with us on making this I think Greg said 25 years or something like that, if we were to say this is going to be a community center and the city's going to reinvest a few $100,000, and this is hypothetical, I'm not trying to, but if that's the way we're going to go, we're going to need more time, and I think we should just discuss it now, whether or not MUD is willing to give us some more time so that we could reinvest in those facilities and make it a senior center or make it a community center or make it a storage facility or offices or something like that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but at our first meeting, and pretty much only one, we talked about at year 9 that you would have an option to renew it for X amount of period. I want to say 3. Is that right?
Correct. Well, we talked about 1-year extensions that would basically run on for.
Well, at one time you talked about 5 years.
Yeah, I thought it was like 3 or 5 or something
3.
like that.
But we had the right to do it all the time.
Right, but it wasn't just for 5. I thought it just went on for.
It was.
Yeah, we were gonna do 5 years, and then we decided to just do it yearly, that we could just, in perpetuity, to just, it was unilateral.
But
So the way this reads at this point is it's an initial 10 years. You don't terminate until 9 years if you want to give notice at that point, and it automatically extends a year, or does some action have to be taken at the 10-year point?
at year 9, I think you would.
You have to issue termination if
Right,
there's going to terminate.
Yeah. We talked about at year 9 you would advise us if you want to renew the lease. Is that correct?
Is that in here anywhere?
I don't remember on
seeing
the
that.
date, but
Yeah, it
the
could be-
spirit of it, what Kevin is saying is correct.
Okay.
And I don't disagree with that, Neil and Kevin. I think what we're saying is, as a body, we would like to ask, and the answer may be no, but we believe that there's things that we could do with that building. And is there a way we can work with you guys to give us the ability to turn that into something more than just office space if we can move into another facility? Is there an option to do that?
Personally, I don't have any problem, if it's used for community positive. The thing you'd have to look at is, I don't know, if you have a termination, realistically, you have a 10-year fixed. That means no termination.
Right.
If you put a 3, 5, whatever, you could still terminate within whatever termination clause is within that time frame, unless it's another fixed.
Right.
So, you could do 5, 3, it doesn't really matter, because if you can terminate, then, it doesn't really matter.
Right. I guess so. Maybe we look at it this way. What is the potential need that the MUD would have to have for that building in the future? And maybe we can resolve it by working backwards. Because we talked before about TECQ or whatever, maybe requiring you guys to have more offices. And maybe it's that we don't give you back the entire facility, but if you need 4 or 5 more offices, we can give 4 or 5 more offices, but yet it can still be used. The part we improve could still be used for a community center or something like that. So it's not kind of an all or nothing. I guess what I'm saying is let's see where you guys need to be, and let's resolve that and go that way. Does
So,
that make any sense?
Director
guys?
Moss,
No.
President Moss, is it my understanding that this draft that's in front of us, the board took action on and approved this copy?
Did we not,
We didn't approve this exact copy, but.
Okay,
it's
not this exact.
Very
copy.
similar.
Okay, I just needed to know if I need to go back for agreement on things. So, let's just simplify it.
Mr. Mayor?
Mud Board, I'll be with you 1 second. Is there any objection to the 10-year clause at the top under years from the Mud Board?
no.
All right. Council, what would you like that to be if you don't want it 10 years?
I object to 10 years, and I would prefer 25 years.
I go along with 25. If we're going to make changes and convert the building and invest taxpayer money, I need something more positive than just 7 remaining years from the time we move into the new town hall. I think 25 would be more appropriate.
All right, anybody else on council?
I'll offer hopefully something that might help soothe the concerns here with Mr. Lamont and Mr. Perro. I understand them where they're coming from, and I agree in principle. However, I'm satisfied with moving forward with what both subcommittees have agreed to in 10 years here, and understanding that what Mr. Perro just said is the number one consideration that we as a council would have to take under if we wanted to do anything to that building that was a significant improvement or change. I'm satisfied right now to get this lease out of the way and done, to move forward as is, and then if we do come up with something, let's take that as a challenge and make it a requirement of how we move forward. I don't think we have to boil the ocean tonight because we can't predict the future.
Anybody else want to make a comment about it?
Are you suggesting that we do 10 years and then at some point down the road, 2 or 3 years from now, renegotiate this lease?
Yes.
Good luck.
Okay.
Mr.
Yes, Jim Perro, and then
Yeah,
Philip.
I was trying to just get a clarification. Patricia could probably jump in and help us here. I know the intent of the termination date, escape clause, if you will. The landlord reserves the right to terminate this lease earlier than the stated termination date. If it's determined, it doesn't specify whether that right and that option exists 1 year into the lease, 5 year into the lease, 8 years into the lease. I know the intent is at the end of 9 years to give a year's notice, but that's not what it says. And Patricia, maybe you can clarify, if we were to agree to this, wouldn't the MUD retain the right, if they had a need, since we don't know what that need might be, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, to say, you've got 1 year notice, vacate the building? Is that not what it says?
I think the language could be tighter. It's a little loose, as the mayor said. You can read it either way. You have to look at the following sentence. It says, landlord shall give written notice to tenant at least 1 year prior to the effective date of termination. If you're looking at termination date up here, then that's 1 year prior to September 30th, 2025. So that's the argument, that it says 1 year at that 9th year.
But they can do it earlier, so.
Well, that would be an argument under, I think, the way it's written. I think it could be just a little tighter to ensure that that was the only time that they could do it, if that's the intent.
All right, Philip had his hand up, and then Garrett.
I agree with Greg and Jim. I would like to see it for as long as possible. You know, if you go way back in the day, if the town had not built that building, there probably would not be anything there right now. It would just be grass. And I think that, you know, we want to use this for a greater purpose. And I don't think that, you know, we're all residents, and the residents are still paying for it. When does the payment end?
10 years left.
It's 10 years left.
10 years. 10 years. We're still paying for it. And so I think that, you know, with so much money having been spent on it, I think that if we can utilize it for something for the community, I just don't see where that's not a win-win for all of us. And so just for myself, I would like to see it, you know, the term as long as possible. And I'd really like to see it used, you know, indefinitely for the community, just because so much money was spent. Was it smart of prior councils to do that? Probably not, but it happened. And so I think, you know, going forward, obviously there might be a time when you, for whatever reason that none of us can imagine, might need it. But I think until that point comes, if we can use it for the community, for a community center or for meeting rooms or for whatever, which is needed, then I think that that's good for the board, and I think that's good for the council.
Garrett, and then I'm going to speak.
My comment was just that, please know that attorneys have not reviewed this document. So there are a lot of, in Patricia's defense, there's a lot of little loose things if you read through here. Please, attorneys haven't seen it yet. I just wanted everybody to know that.
I'm not opposed to the 10-year, me personally. Would I like to see it longer? Yes. I think as a compromise, I might propose that you either extend the 10 years slightly, or you allow for a longer notice. Both of those work together. But I'm not opposed to just 10 years. I don't want it to be vague about changing its use, and the landlord reserves the right to terminate the lease earlier than the termination date when we're still paying on it for 10 years. I think I won't agree to that. So let's clean that up if the board is agreeable to clean that up. And it looked like to me that at least two of us said they would agree to 10 years. It looks like two said they really would prefer 25, and a third said would prefer longer too. So that's kind of where we are as a body. Neil?
When the committee was formed between the two council members and the two MUD members, I thought the intent was to look at what's discussed at the joint meeting back on January 20th, which I was hopefully attempted with, that's what we did. And I wanted to bring something in here that the council and the MUD board could look at, and didn't even have to have a joint session. The idea was, let's bring it back to our own bodies and vote up or down. Now, this meeting started 32, 33 minutes ago. We're still dancing around. Now, if the intent was not to have something that you could bring back in and vote up and down, like a subcommittee brings back and says, this is what we have agreed on, and then be going back and forth. What is here now is what was represented at the joint meeting. Now, if you want to vote up, fine. You want to vote it down, fine. But are we going to spend another 25, 35 minutes and this be going around in what the computer language used to call a do loop? Now, who's at risk here? The town is at risk because they built the building on land they didn't own. If you want to continue to be at risk, fine. Now, if you want the committee to meet again, I'll do it one more time. If the town attorney hasn't had a chance to review the document, that's not my fault. If you want the language tightened up, good. I think Tim and Garrett will agree. I made a bunch of calls to these guys saying, do you want to meet again? Is there something else we have to look at? Let's, wanted to, before we came here, I wanted this tightened up as much as possible to minimize discussion tonight. So we could come back with recommendation as a group and say, this is what we recommend. And this is what I thought we were doing.
Appreciate that, Neil.
But if this is going to keep going on, let's throw it back to the committee. Let's hear your recommendations. Let's do it one more time. But I'm going to emphasize one more time, because that's all the time I'm going to expend on it.
All right. So, Jim, you want to see what your people maybe feel about some of those comments?
I say 10.
I'm in favor of a little longer.
Me too. Jim, listen, Philip, I totally concur with what you said. Yeah, in our meeting, what I'm the one that asked for Jennifer to put on her thinking cap and come back and tell us what she thinks we might need 20 years down the road, Garrett, because the only thing that I was hampered by was if we throw a long-term lease over there and it's, let me just say it comes out as a senior citizen center, and 10 years from now, all of a sudden, we have to have 5 more offices. Well, we'd like to have the ability to get those 5 more offices. And that's outside of our long-term needs, 100 years. I mean, it's a community building. Let's use it for the community.
And I'm going to add, if you go down to Section G, general provisions, we have in there regarding alterations.
What section was general provisions?
D, general provisions, landlord, tenant agree on the following
Right.
alterations. If you're going to change something in the building, you still would need to come back and discuss it with the landlord, i.e. the MUD. And if you start talking about $300,000, $400,000 for a different type of use, that's what's going to happen. As we've discussed ourselves, we know the way that building was built. You're going to have to put up trusses because the way the load-bearing walls are in that building, they didn't exactly build it for a future design. They built it basically to what it's spec'd for right now. And if you start talking about changes, you just can't simply knock out a wall because you might be threatening the structural integrity of the building.
Okay, I look at that as, you know, leaseholder improvements, they surely need to be approved by the landlord, and all of that would be dealt with in an engineering fashion. That's not the purpose, to deal with the detail here. So, Mud Board was going through a process of trying to say, what would they agree to?
That's actually, Nick, that's,
Let them finish.
Okay, Jim, do you have I'm recommending 15 years. I don't see any reason not to.
I could support that.
We have no use
You
for
may
the
have to spend
building.
money, I don't have a problem with that at all. 'Cause I look at it as a long-term thing for the community.
Right.
All I care about is if we ever have a future need, we have a way to work with you to get that
That's
future
later
need.
in the
Right.
agreement.
Right.
You agree to 15 years?
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
We got at least 3 of us agreed to that, so.
Anybody else you want to see? Neil?
I mean, if it's 200,000, undo it again?
Excuse me?
Do y'all want to comment on the 15
Well,
years?
I'm looking at the time here, and
Just
I mean-
comment upon the 15. You either like it or don't
Yeah.
like it.
I'd rather stay with 10.
All right, Neil?
Same.
All right. So, Mr. Moss, what I've heard is you're kind of a 3-2 split on the 15 years. Council, would you go for 15 years? Anybody object to 15 years?
I'll stay with my 25.
25.
All right. So we have a majority that would go to 15 years. And if we'll make that edit change for something to come back to us for approval of both boards, we'll deal with that. Of course, that would change the termination date.
Yes.
Is anybody have any problem with the 1-year notice from termination date issue? Anybody? No, okay. So the issue becomes, I prefer to somehow get that first paragraph, first sentence of that termination clause
Well,
tightened down and be more specific. So I'll leave that up to somebody legally to deal with that.
I don't have, I'm sorry.
Greg?
I don't have a problem with the 1 year. What I do have a problem is with own business purposes as an excuse to have us vacate the building.
The
We
last
originally talked about a
phrase, own
governmental
business
entity.
purposes.
A governmental entity requiring them to need additional space. We talk about the initial joint meeting we had, and that's what we talked about then. It was none of they just want maybe a bigger meeting room themselves. It was a governmental entity coming in and saying that they would require additional space.
Okay. Council, any of you have a problem with own business purposes?
I have the same concern that Mayor Pro Tem Lamont has. I think in the spirit of what we discussed in January, it was said, what if TCEQ or some other agency requires us to have more space for whatever, then we'd need to be able to terminate the lease. And it was not that the MUD itself would be the determining factor, but an outside agency would force them to take that action. And now that's not what this says.
Whatever we discussed in the last meeting, we've discussed in the last meeting. This is the way the document came to us tonight. So the question is, I see 2 people that
Excuse
have an
me.
objection to the own business purposes. Anybody else?
Yes, that's what we agreed to in the subcommittee.
Own
Is
business
exactly-
purposes?
No.
Is exactly what Mr. Lamont's talking about. Somehow, they might have missed it, but we specifically stated inside the 10 years, the only way they could terminate is if the state comes in or some governing body and basically mandates it.
By the way, they haven't done that for 35 years.
Yeah, we didn't expect it to be, but we didn't want the MUD or anybody to just come in and say, well, you know, we want you out for any reason. Is basically what this states.
So what you're stating, Tim, is what's in front of us was not what you and Garrett agreed to.
Yes.
So I guess that shoots the theory of being able to rubber stamp this based on the subcommittee's work.
All right, so what I'm hearing is, and Neil suggested this, subcommittee get back together, or the board, y'all decide what you would agree to. What I'm hearing here is the majority of council would prefer to go back to the words, not just other business purposes, but be more specific about that. So, next item is base rent. Anybody object to the $1 per year?
That's $1.50. Inflation.
So I have one objection from the MUD board that wants it at $1.50. Anybody else?
Good.
All right, council, any objection? All right, the $1 per year is decided upon. Any objection to permitted uses being changed to rooms plural as opposed to room?
Or spaces, correct?
or spaces, either way. We okay with that change? Okay.
You're on a roll.
I don't have any more changes until, anybody else have a change on other pages they want to point out? All right, what about E4, tenant use of premises in
I'm sorry, you were going down, I just meant in that area. All right.
any area?
Okay, I've got a question. In altering the premises, B2E,
B2E, which is going to be on page 4.
it says tenant agrees not to, okay? So if we sign this agreement tonight, and we stay there, and then 2 years from now, we want to build a community center, according to this, we've got to go back to them for approval.
That is correct.
And we did, at least I sent this out in an email, and Kevin and I talked about this. This was through an email. The subcommittee did not agree to interior, at least on our side, we did not agree to interior changes having to be approved by the MUD board.
Is that in here?
Interior of the building, we could- what's that?
Is that in here? I didn't see that.
No, I think it is in there. So it's the concern that Mr. Perro has. The only thing that I would be willing to agree to is if we made an exterior change to the building, which required some sort of change in parking or handicap ramps or something like that, that would alter their facilities as well. But that was part of my negotiations that I came back, and I'm really not sure where we were with that.
Is there a paragraph in there that says at the conclusion of the 15 years that you have to put the building back in its original condition? Is there anything in there that says that?
Yes, in
Yes.
paragraph D1, it specifies that the landlord may require the tenant at the end of the term of the tenant's expense, remove and physical additions and improvements, repair alterations, and restore the premises to the condition existing at the commencement date, normal wear and tear expected. So if we were to invest $200,000, $300,000, whatever that cost might possibly be, what this says is if you wanted it back as it is today, you could require that we undo all that and restore it back to its original condition. And that would be troublesome to me to take the commitment to spend the money knowing that you had the control to have us take it all apart.
Okay, but the issue of us approving alterations during the course of the 15-year basic lease is really not an issue. The issue is what happens at the end of 15 years. I don't know why the MUD would want to interfere in the first 15 years. If you want to turn it into something else, now we could argue about what happens at the end of 15 years, but I don't think there's any argument in the interim of the 15 years.
All right, to me, I do see a problem with the phrase that says return it to original condition. To me, it seems like if you could add something in that D1 unless otherwise agreed upon in writing. So if there were proposed changes and you agreed upon those changes, that you surely aren't expecting to return it to the original position. I think that's a point. I lease space and have for over 20 years in my business. Every time I make any kind of significant change, the landlord wants to know about that change and approve it, and make sure that permits are pulled appropriately, inspections are done appropriately. So I personally don't have a problem with going back to my landlord and saying, here's my proposed changes, but I don't expect the landlord to come back and say, I don't like what you're gonna do with it. That approval is really, does it meet fire code? Does it still meet safety standards? I don't think you should be able to say, I don't like the fact that you're gonna put 3 restrooms, not 4, or whatever that might be. And I don't think that's the intent here. No. But it doesn't bother me that says I'm gonna go back to the landlord and say, here's our proposed changes, we expect you to review them, and if you have an objection, to object to them. But
I agree with what you just said, is that if we approve your changes, then we shouldn't expect you to remove those changes after we approved them.
all right, so D1 needs to deal with that issue, attorneys and staff. Somehow you need to deal with the issue of not returning it to original if an approval was given for a modification. That just is too vague. So we heard from our subcommittee members that said did not agree to prior permission to make interior changes, only exterior changes. So B to E says tenant agrees to, not to alter the premises. So that still is an issue. Is it agreeable to say alter the premises without prior approval, or what are you looking for there?
Mr.
Yes,
Mayor.
Greg?
We should be able to.
The MUD had a full meeting, they had an agenda item for this, they went into executive session for this, and we're under the gun to approve this tonight. And I think this is a bad move on our part to do this. I think we should have this agendaed on our full meeting and discuss this, rather than try and, what do you got, another 10 minutes to get this done?
Well, it's gotta go to an attorney anyway before we can.
All right, so Garrett had his hand up and Ryland has his hand up. I'll take your comments.
I was just going to say that, I mean, I actually agree with Greg. He's correct. I was just going to say I was going to add some language to the alteration part, but if you're going to follow Greg's advice, then then I have a problem with janitorial services, that I don't think we should share janitorial services. We should be able to have our own services.
All right.
Things
So
like that.
it sounds like to me that there are points that have been made tonight and still points to be worked out. We don't have long before we're gonna run out of time in this meeting. But we've had some discussion about it. I think there was value in us being able to have that discussion. We have at least agreed in principle to 15 years and a few other changes. Let's try to get a new draft done, and is the subcommittee from the council willing to meet again?
Honestly, I would rather meet in an executive
Council first.
session and negotiate the points and make sure that we're all on the same page before we go back, or we're
All
going to
right.
wind up in the same
But
spot.
you're willing to do it after that?
Sure. Once we understand what everybody
All
wants.
right, Ryland, you had your hand up, and then Tim real quick, and then I'm gonna go to Mr. Moss to see if they're willing to continue.
Yeah, I would just like to, at some point in the process, get a handle on what's in here that was added after the subcommittee stopped meeting. To do that is not negotiating in good faith based on where we started with this process.
All right, Jim, any comments you wanna make, or your board?
No, I don't think so. I think we're certainly willing to meet at another time. Neil?
Definitely.
Okay. We're okay.
All right, so just real quickly, to deal with a couple of items. Item 3, just recently, Philip discovered that there's this 2008 interlocal agreement between the entities. Patricia, did we ever get from Pam or Jennifer where you had a memory that the MUD took action to deal with agreements that had all entities named, that somehow clarified that?
Yeah, I have not heard back. I know that staff was working on that yesterday to attempt to find out if there were some documents and they were looking for documents. The ones I reviewed that our staff came up with wasn't answering the question. I was trying to remember back after that consolidation occurred, there was some actions taken, and I remember the discussions about the parties and contracts. I don't know if that was handled in the consolidation documents. I can't remember. I just remember the discussion of the need to move forward with handling that matter where you had Master District and MUD 2 as an entity, and we were researching yesterday trying to find documents to resolve that and had not been able to yet.
All right, so the attorneys are talking, the managers are talking. That document's out there to try to help us. It did at least clarify unincorporated areas as an ILA, so if you were looking at, do you have an ILA? I don't know whether that's legal standing or not, but there seemed to be that. And as far as item 5,
Can I, Miss,
yes. Neil?
Kevin, you want to go first?
You go first.
Neil?
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought Kevin was going to shoot. Regarding, and this has come up as part of our discussion at FECC. And
I'm sorry, Neil, what is the,
this is the EMS Consolidation Committee. Fire EMS Consolidation Committee. Those areas that are that are not in the MUD, but they are within the town. You're putting it at risk on mutual aid, with our mutual aid agreements. If we're going into an unincorporated fire protection, if we're extending fire protection to an unincorporated area inside the county, we're covered. We go to another town, we're covered. But if we go to one of these uncovered areas within the town. And we, safety first, guys. We're
Okay,
gonna
I'm gonna
go out.
stop you, Neil. I hear what you're saying. All I was really pointing out is there is an agreement. Read the agreement. You probably didn't get it much before we got it. If not, it does reference providing services to unincorporated area. We'll deal with that another time. I was really summarizing where we're going, not debating that issue, and I understand your points about that issue, so,
Real quick, Mayor, can I say?
real quick.
B2 references assessments. I don't think any assessment, and that's the whole purpose, is everyone in this town pays fire taxes except for these properties, and assessment per this has not been assessed that I know of. So,
Okay.
and-
All right, very good. So item 5, council, you had in your information a draft agreement, is that right, Stephen, that listed 6 properties, or 5 items, I guess, that seem to be clearly dealt with, that we'll put that on council agenda to deal with that appropriately, just to let you know. And I know that Stephen and Jennifer met to try to work out some of the other issues that are a little bit more complicated to deal with that. To me, this is an item that staff needs to work out adequately, and let's not get political about the deeding over the infrastructure. So council will discuss that and make that appropriately. All right, so it doesn't look like we took action. I appreciate all the comments tonight.
Before you, I just want to point out one thing. I noticed later on you're talking about your audit and your regular agenda. If the town is carrying these assets on their books,
That's a different issue. We're going to adjourn, and we're going to deal with that issue.
I'm just worrying about overstating assets as far as an audit.
We're going to deal with that appropriately. We've talked to our auditors about that, and that will be handled appropriately. All right.
Nick.
It is
Nick,
8
Nick,
minutes till
Nick.
7.
Please, before you adjourn, our fire chief has had major surgery. His wife is in the audience. Can we please have an update from her on his status of recovery? I think both boards would be.
I'm not going to put her on that spot. That's a private matter of someone's medical condition. But I appreciate that, and so I'm not going to put her on the spot, and she shook her head no. So, all right. So it is 7 minutes till 7. Council, we will be in recess.
The Mud Board is adjourned at 7 minutes to 7.
All right, council, you have a short recess for rearrangement. Thank you.
They're gonna spend hundreds of thousands.